In this video, we'll be talking about how to add an input box to your application. Input box is used the same way you use a text box. So you use it to read information from the user. However, for an input box, you don't have to add any control to your application. So you use an input box in case your application is already cluttered with a lot of controls. This is the general form or format for an input box. And you notice how it accepts 3 arguments. The first one is a prompt. This is basically the message that you want to display to the user. The title. This is the title of the input box. The default value is the default value that you want to read from the user in case the user did not enter anything. Here's a simple example of that. And now we're going to move to Visual Basic to show you how we can create an application that reads information using an input box. I created this application, and in this application we are going to use a text box to read information from the user. So at this point there's nothing new. We're not using an input box up to this point. As you can see in this application, there are a number of controls. The first one is a form, and the text is form 1. There are 2 labels. This is the first label. The text property is changed to please enter your name. The second label is called LBL output. The text box is called TXT name. Then we have the button, and it is called btn read text box. Let's take a look at the code that we have. As you can notice, there's nothing new. In the coding part, we have the 4 parts: define, assign, calculate, and output. You define a variable since you are going to be reading a value from the user. I'm going to assign str name to the name that the user enters. Calculate, I'm not doing any calculation in this button. And all I'm going to do is just display the name back to the user with the word hello followed by the name that the user entered. So now my application is working, and again, nothing new up to this point. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to create 2 more buttons. Both of them are going to read information from the input box. The first button is going to use an input box to read a string. The second button is going to use an input box to read a number. Again, input box is used the same way you use a text box, so you can read strings and numbers. So I'm going to click on the button, Control copy, then paste the new button. I'm going to change the text and to read from input box dash string. I'm going to change the name for that button to btn read input box string. Double click. I'm going to do the exact same steps. The only difference going to happen is at the assign part. Instead of reading from a text box, we're going to be reading from an input box. So I'm going to follow the exact same thing. Define tim str name as string. Now the assign part. Str name equals. I'm still going to make sure that I'm converting the information or the data to the right data form. Now, instead of using the text box, this is the part where I add the input box. To add an input box, you just type in input, and you notice the IntelliSense, how it starts to show you the different options. I want the input box. And you have parentheses. An input box accepts 3 arguments. The first one is going to be the message that you're going to display to the user. So I'm going to show you 3 different examples. The first input box is where we show the message to the user. I'm going to show the message, please enter your name. And I'm going to continue writing my code the same way I did before. Again, there's no calculation in this button. The output LBL output.text equals. I'm going to use a different message in order for you to see the different output. One we read from the text box, the other one we read from the input box. So I'm going to enter my name. I'm going to use the first button to show you the first button. The second one, and this is an input box. Notice a couple of things on the input box. The prompt is the message that you're going to send to the user. So please enter your name. It's going to appear as the message that the user is going to see. The title, if you left it blank, it's going to take the same title as your project. So the title for this project is InputBox OnlineClass. So I'm going to enter James. So when I click OK, this message is going to change to hello to hi James. So now we used an input box to read from the user. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to show you how to change the title and the input box. So I'm going to call it username. So when we run the application again, notice how the title now is different. A second ago, it has the same name as my application. Now it's changed based on the information that I entered over here. If I want to add a default value, so if I'm adding a default value as a string, so in this case I'm reading a name, you can add a default name for users. So in this case, this name will appear in the box. And now you notice how the prompt is the message that's going to appear to the user. The title is going to appear as the title for the input box. The default value is going to be the default value that is entered. So if you click OK, it took that variable or that value as the input. So now I'm going to add another button. In this case, I'm going to read a number instead of a string. So I'm going to change the text into read from input box. Instead of a string, I'm going to put number. I'm going to change the name to btn read input box number. I'm going to do the exact same thing, but this time, since I'm reading a number, I'm going to need to define a data type that is a number, so either an integer or a decimal or a double. I'm going to just keep it simple. I'm going to just define an integer variable. So again, define dim number as integer, assign int number equal. I need to make sure that I'm converting to the right data type, and I'm going to use an input box the same way we use an input box over here. I'm going to do the same thing over here. Input box. I'm going to send a message that says, please enter a number. I want the title to be, you don't have to enter the title and the default value. You can just put the message box, the message that's going to appear in the input box. But for the sake of the example, I'm going to put a title as well. So I'm going to title my input box as random number. And in case the user did not enter anything, I wanted to take the random number of 5. So now that I read the number from the user, I'm going to do a simple calculation. I'm going to take that number and I'm just going to add 10 to it. So whatever number the user enters, I'm going to add 10 to that number and I'm going to display it back to the user. And since this is a number, I'm going to make sure to send it to use the dot to string. So I'm going to click over here. Notice how please enter a number. Random number is the title and the default value was 5. So if I click OK, 15 is the right number. If I saw any other number other than 15, that means I have a logical error. Let's try to enter a different number than the default. So now I enter 12 plus 10, so I expect to see 22. So now my application is working. Now this is how you use an input box to read information from the user. This way now you have a different way of reading information other than just using a text box.